Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video, we will be looking at fragment identifiers, figures, and media queries. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up our text editor. We'll save this as fragment.html. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. We'll start our code the same way that we always do. You can use the template if you would like to. Let's title this Fragment Identifier. Whoops. And we'll leave some space to add embedded styles. Alright, so when we are looking at fragment identifiers, we're talking about a way to link information within a page. And this would be a good time for us to take a look at how to write links in general. We've talked before about how to create a basic anchor link, but from here on out we are going to start working with more and more media files, and so it would be good to review how we can actually reference information that is within a slightly different organizational structure. So let's actually add this information in our code for now. We might not leave this, but it'd be good for us to just write this down. So I'm going to create an H1, call this folder organization. We'll create a paragraph and we'll say linking to files within folders. Then let's say a regular link looks like we'll do another one linking to pages within a folder. A link to a file within a folder looks like to returning back to a previous folder. Turning back to a larger folder looks like we'll say returning back to a previous folder before entering another folder. Changing folders looks like Let's save this, refresh, so we can take a look at our notes. So up until this point, we've been pretty much doing all of our links, having everything in the same folder hierarchy. So everything, if we have had a folder, has all been in the same folder. Same thing with your homework assignments. Everything's been in the same folder. So if you link to anything, you don't need to have anything in front of the actual file name. You just need the actual file name, the proper file extension. If you are going to link to a page that's within a folder, then you need to specify the folder name that you are going to enter, / and then the actual file. So let's actually create an example. Call this website. Call this pages, images, CSS, in pages, we'll create a page that's called About. So if we look at this structure in comparison, we change the view. That's a little too large. Okay. So we have a folder called website, and here we have a CSS folder. This is where we could put our CSS styles. We have a folder for our images, if we had a bunch of images, and then we have our individual website pages. So our HTML would go in here. A lot of times you'll also have a folder for your JavaScript files. So right now we don't have any media or anything to add. We just have our pages. So part of the confusing thing about writing your links is you have to think about where you are creating the link from. So if we had, let's create another page. If we had a page called Contact, and we were creating a link in our navigation to the About page, because they are in the same folder, we can just use about.html for our link. If we were in this folder and we were creating a link, maybe we had our home page. So let's do maybe for some reason we have our home page is going to be outside of all of these files, and then we have our pages kind of going. If we think of our sitemap, we have this is the first step, and then we have our primary navigation. Maybe we have folders in here that link to secondary items on our sitemap. So if we are linking from these pages to each other, we just need the name of the other file. If we were creating a link from index, we would need to write it like this, where we would need to say, I want to link to a file that is contained within pages, and then choose About. If you were returning back to a previous folder, and better example of this one, go back to our code. It'd actually be if we change this to index. So if we were actually on one of these pages and we wanted to link to our index page, we'd actually have to return to the previous folder, which is containing this folder. So we'd be going back a step and then finding the file with this name. And this, let's change to images. And let's just call this photo. Change this to a JPEG. Now we don't actually have this file. So what we could have here is an image that we are linking to. The image is going to be shown on our About page. Maybe it's a photo of us. And in this instance, when we are creating the link, we are saying that from this folder, we want to move back, enter another folder, like images, and then find the file that says photo on it. So this is just a good review for looking at how you can organize your links, and it's all relative again to whatever page that you're actually working from. And it's important to write out your sitemap and think about that structure beforehand so that way you know exactly how your pages relate to each other. So a fragment identifier is another type of link. Let's go ahead and add another H1. Type in fragment identifier. Fragment identifiers are used to link to a specific portion of a website So where you might use a fragment identifier would be if you had, let's say, a really long page and you had all of your content for your website all on one page, and you wanted to allow people to jump to a section later on that page. So let's say you had a frequently asked question list and you had a bunch of different questions. Somebody could click on a link that would take them halfway down the page to a particular area, so they wouldn't have to scroll through all that information themselves. Another way that you might want to use this is if you were going to have a link at the bottom of your page to return to the top. This could be really helpful with a mobile version, similar to the idea of having the navigation on the bottom. You could have a fragment identifier which would take you all the way back up to the top. It can also be a great way for people who are using assistive technologies to be able to jump to information quicker and be able to find information that is specific to certain keywords that they are looking for. Alright, so above our folder organization, let's create a link. And we're going to say fragment.html. So we want to say the actual page that we're on. And then we're going to do hashtag. And then we're going to say, let's just say content. And then we'll say skip to content. So a fragment identifier requires two parts. And we could add this, there's another paragraph. A fragment identifier requires two parts, a link and content with a matching ID. Refresh. So here we have the link, which is at the very top. So what we need now is an ID. So in our H1, we're going to add an ID. and we're going to call this content. Save, refresh. So now if we click on skip to content, it would take us to the ID on this page. So it's a little hard to see if your content is kind of short and close to the top. If you resize your window so it's as small as possible, you'll see that we'll actually jump down to that section to be able to look at. Alright, so we are going to practice using this a little bit. We can go ahead and hit save, and let's actually start a new file. Let's go to save as. We can just do this on the desktop, and let's say favorites.html. For the title, let's say favorites. Just have it match. We'll leave room for embedded styles. Hit save. And open this up as well. Alright, so I want you to fill this out based off of your own information. So we're going to start with an H1, and I want you to put your name. So I'm going to put in mine. We'll say your favorites. And then we're going to create a couple of different lists of different types of favorites. So we're going to create an H2 that will go next, and we're going to give this an ID, which is going to be called categories. This is going to be favorite categories. And so you'll notice we're giving an ID to this section, which is going to mean that when we are done, when we're done looking at a category lower on the page, we're going to create returns so we can return back to essentially the master list of different categories. And then we're going to create links to take us to lower sections. So we'll create a link to href equals, and we'll do favorites.html. And then we're going to create a couple of categories. So we're going to have a movies category. This will take us to favorite movies. And we're going to create a return. I'm going to move this over just a little bit for now. Create another link. This will be favorites.html. And then we'll do books. We'll do animals. foods, and then music. So I'm going to hit return, just kind of help break this up visually into sets. We can actually hit save, refresh this just so you have an idea what this is going to look like. So here we have our, essentially our title going across, our first group, which has our categories. We're going to create another H2 with an ID. This one will be equal to our first category, movies. And then we'll say my favorite movies. Do an H2. And then here you'll actually create an ordered list. And you'll give us 5 items. For your category. And then once you have this idea down, actually, let's go ahead and add a link. We'll do favorites.html hashtag categories. And then we'll say click here to return to the categories list. Refresh that. So this will essentially be our set. So we're going to highlight this and copy it, and then we'll paste it 4 more times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. See if we have. And then you'll want to go through and actually change these as needed. So our first category is going to be movies. Our second one should be books. Then animals. Foods. And then music. And then it's essentially just a matter of you going in and actually filling out this information. So you could go ahead and do that if you wanted to. Let's take a look at this file as a smaller window. So if we scroll through, we can find that information if we wanted to. But what we can also do is we can click and choose a category. So movies, I can return to my category list, click on books, go to the top, click on animals. It looks like there's something wrong with my link for animals. Might have written my ID wrong. Oh, I did uppercase. Whoops. Alright, let's try again. Animals. I did the same thing with food. I was getting ahead of myself and thinking about how I was going to capitalize my heading. Okay, food. Yep, did the same thing with music. Alright, so now each of these are going to work. So this is going to be one of the requirements that is going to be included on your final project. So you want to know how to be able to use these in a website. This might be something that would be good to have on a page that has a lot of information, like the course description, or on your credits. You could maybe list all of the credits for your information. Maybe all of your images will be in one category with a credit list, all of the articles that you used or the sites, or even just this idea of being able to click on a link and go back to the top of a page. This could be really helpful if you were looking at something in a mobile view, or you could easily kind of change where you are on the page. Alright, so I'm going to hit save. We're going to open up a new file, and this time I actually do want everything to be in a folder together. So I'm actually going to close these. And before we begin, I want to take a look at image optimization. If you go to week 5 on Canvas, I have some links that are going to be helpful for what we're going to cover in this video. I also have some files that I want you to download. So go ahead and download these 5 images: cat, panda, alpaca, giraffe, and koala. We're going to be using these for this next demo. And in the meantime, while you're downloading these, we're going to take a look at image optimization. This is a nice website that covers 10 must-know image optimization tips. So depending on what track you're following, whether you're working web development or digital media, you may or may not be directly responsible for the images you'll be working with. Maybe you're going to be working more on the code side of things, but it's still important for you to know how to optimize images and then how to ask people for optimized images. So this website will show you a couple of different tips. We'll just kind of scan through it and I'll fill in information kind of as needed. They have kind of a checklist of different items. Here they have name your images descriptively and in plain language. So this kind of goes back to that idea that we've talked about with search engine optimization, using keywords that people are going to perhaps look up. Here they have a couple of different examples of terms that people might use to look for the car that is above. So they're suggesting that it would be better to name this file 2012 Ford Mustang LX Red instead of kind of the default name that is usually assigned to the image when the person is taking the picture with a camera. The suggestion shows optimize your alternative text carefully. So making sure that your text is descriptive to what's in the picture. In this example, the text is pretty straightforward. It's really that same kind of information. Here they have some examples of what to do or what not to do. describe your images in plain language. If you sell products that have model numbers or serial numbers, use them in your alt attributes. Don't stuff your alt attributes full of keywords. Don't use alt attributes for decorative images. Choose your image dimensions and product angles wisely. So this is going to be more of the advice for the person who's exploring digital media. But you want to consider the types of shots that you have and whether or not they make sense, and then how you're going to organize them on a page. Here they have some really good tips for working with larger images. Once we start working with images where we can resize them based off of the window size, you might feel tempted to use an image that's large and just shrink it down to be smaller on the page. But by linking to a larger image, you're actually going to increase your page's loading time. So you want to link to multiple pages depending on how large the window is going to be. This is going to make more sense, again, once we start working with media queries and being able to have separate style sets based off of our windows. Here this says reduce the file size of your images. Nearly 50% of consumers won't even wait 3 seconds for an e-commerce site to load. Amazon has found out that if their pages were to slow down by just 1 second, they would lose $1.6 billion a year. So being able to load your page quickly is vital to having a successful website. So here they have some advice on what you can do to reduce the image file size. And this includes saving your image for web. If you have worked with Photoshop at all or another photo editor, you might have encountered the option for saving a file and then being able to alternatively save for web. So these are directions that follow along with how to save images in Photoshop. If you take one of the digital media courses that covers Photoshop in this program, you will learn how to do this at some point. But what they recommend doing is trying to find a balance between the quality of the image. There's only going to be so much that we can actually see in the quality of an image on a screen versus it being printed out. So you can actually lower the quality, and here they're recommending to 70%, and trying to find that balance between how large the file has to be versus how much quality is going to be there. There's also a bit of optimizing the color range. So by reducing the range of colors, you can also kind of save space. This process is actually really similar to what you would do if you're saving a GIF. So here they have some general guidelines that you could follow. So I would suggest bookmarking this page and being able to reference it in the future. Here they have a couple of recommendations of different sites that you can use if you don't have access to Photoshop. Here they have suggestions how large should image files be. For e-commerce images, a good rule of thumb is to keep your image file below 70 kilobytes. Choose the right file type. So we've talked a little bit about the differences between JPEG, GIF, and PNG. Here they have some more information about these 3 different file types. So you could take a look at this kind of more in depth. You could take a look at this as well. Optimize your thumbnails. Many e-commerce sites will use thumbnail images, especially on category pages. They quickly showcase products without taking up too much real estate. So this gives you some advice on how to create thumbnails. Use image sitemaps. Beware of decorative images. Use caution when using content delivery networks. Test your images. So just some guidelines. The part that I wanted you to really consider is thinking about how to optimize your images and save them for the web, and then also thinking about your alternative text descriptions. So hopefully by now you have downloaded these files. Alright, so next we're going to be taking a look at using images with figure and figure caption elements. So you should have those images downloaded, and what I would like for you to do is create a folder. I'm going to call this animals. Inside of the folder I have another folder that is called images. Inside of images we have the 5 different images, and I have already gone and optimized these for us to use. They are all the same size, so they should work really well next to each other. We don't have any kind of awkward dimensions. I've already optimized the quality of them, taking into account how large they are going to be. So that's all already been done for you. We're going to open up Sublime and let's start a new file. Save as. Let's find our animals folder. Call this figure.html. And we'll go ahead and open our file in a browser so we can look at it at the same time. Let's title this images. And let's leave room for embedded styles. So we've worked with images before, and in this demo we are going to look at how we can use 2 elements that work together with images. The first is called figure, and then the second is called figure caption or fig caption. And these allow for an image to be structurally associated with text that accompanies it, in this case a caption. Technically you could create an image and put text next to it, but this structurally is going to show a relationship between the figure and the caption and pair them together with each other. So the structure for this is going to look like, we're going to just add this into the body section, is you would first create the figure element, and then inside you would create a figure caption. So within the figure you would link to an image. So I'm just going to place image there real quick, and then within the figure caption is where you could write, let's say we had title, artist, date. So this is kind of the structure that we are going to use with the page that we are going to create. So I'm going to remove this for now. We'll start off with the H1. We'll say animals. We'll create a figure. in our figure, we are going to link to one of our images. And we want to think about where the image is going to be in relation. So we need to go into the folder called, let's see, was it image or images? It was images. So we need to go into a folder called images. From there, let's take the cat image, and then we'll add a width of 300, height 200, do an alternative description. We'll say cat walking through grass. I'm not the best writer, so if you can come up with something that fits better, you could use a different description. Next, we're going to add our figure caption, where we'll have this the same on each. We'll say title, artist, and then date, and then we'll end our figure caption. And then we'll go ahead and do this for each of our pictures. So you could actually highlight this and copy it. Just make sure that you replace everything. So it's 3, 4, 5. So let's see, what other animals do we have in here? So our second one, we do alpaca. Here I have alpaca standing in snowy field. Giraffe. Giraffe standing in field. Koala sitting in tree. Let's see, what was that? Leaf. Panda. Panda laying on branch. So save that, refresh. Now we have all of our animals. So images are going to display as inline. The figure is going to display as a block. So while we're used to our images being in line with each other and continuing across, now they actually are going to stack up on top of each other. So we could actually play around a little bit with how we want to style these images by using our CSS. So I'm going to add figure. Say float left. So now, as long as there is enough space on the screen, they are going to kind of fill in and they'll float to the left. And so I can kind of resize the window. So this is one way that you might make your page be responsive to the window size. You could also have your images scale depending on the window size. You can also add width 300 pixels. So rather than actually having the dimension here, we could actually remove these, and I would say it's going to be better to actually have your dimensions in your CSS rather than your HTML anyways. Let's add a margin, 10 pixels. So kind of saying specifically how much space we want between them. Let's add figure caption. Text align center. Font size. And I'm going to do 0.8 For your final project, you'll want to do all of your fonts in M's. Do font style italic. It's kind of common when you're working with figures, especially in textbooks. And let's actually add a border so we can kind of see what's happening. Border 1 pixel solid, we'll just make it black. So here we actually have a box around. We can add a border around this as well. Border 1 pixel solid. We could remove this one and see what it looks like to just have the one. This actually kind of creates a nice look where we have the whole figure with the border around it and then just kind of a nice clean edge. We could change the background color. I think we could actually add a little bit more padding on here. Let's do padding, 5 pixels. Maybe we want to change the font. Let's do font family Pyrus Fantasy. Kind of give it an aesthetic that kind of matches the animal pictures a little bit. If we wanted to, maybe we want a black line along the top. So maybe instead we do border top, then 1 pixel solid. Except for that kind of creates a weird line. I think I like it better without. You could also create a border around the image. Maybe that would give a cleaner look to it. Try that. So that looks a little nicer. So if you wanted there to be a line separating them, you could do that. That kind of makes it look a little bit more like a Polaroid. We could also add a shadow underneath to kind of make it look like it's standing out, kind of popping a little. So I'll let you kind of play around with the styles if you want to add anything more. So we're going to use this page as an opportunity to explore some of the semantic HTML that we haven't looked at very much to this point. we've been focusing predominantly on our header, navigation, main, and footer. There's a couple other types of semantic HTML which were created based off of common elements that people were wanting. So, section indicates a section of a document such as a chapter or topic. Article present an independent entry such as a blog posting or comment. An aside indicates a sidebar or other tangential content. And then time represents a date or a time. So we're going to kind of transform this from a page with just images and kind of turn it more into a kind of blog looking website. So let's go back to our HTML. Let's see, we have our images and everything. Let's do right after body. We'll create a section. And we'll have this section contain everything. So we'll have it go all the way to the bottom body and tag. And then here we will change this from animals to my favorite animals. Or you could leave it. These I took from my own list when I was creating the favorites list. We're going to add an aside. So we're going to say fun fact. We'll just say sea otters hold hands when they sleep to keep from drifting apart. So on our little blog about our favorite animals, we're going to have this little side. So here we have that at the very top. And then we are going to put each of these animals into an article. Each will have their own article. So on the opposite side of each figure, I'm going to create the beginning tag for article, and we'll do an end tag for article. So each of these will be it'll be like having a bunch of blog entries where somebody could go click on it, maybe see a blurb, and then go read more information. Maybe it's like a Wikipedia. And then just inside of our article, we're going to create an H2. And this will just be the name of the type of animal. So we'll do cat. We could tab this all over so it's kind of obvious how everything's nesting. Here I'll do the alpaca, indent that. Whoops. Just do giraffe. And if you wanted to, you could even try doing this with your own images. I would suggest if you're going to do that to resize them all ahead of time, just so that way it'll be easier when you're trying to get these all to look uniform. Alright, so I now have my H2 headings. Next, we're going to create times for each of these. So thinking about when the entries were published. So just after H2, we'll create a time element. So we'll do time, date, time equals, and then we'll just do the date. So for the date I'm creating this video, 2019, and then it's 05, 24, and then outside of our tag we'll do May 24, 2019, and then we'll do our end time tag. So I'm going to actually copy this, highlight, and just paste this after the H2 on each of these. It's going to be okay if they all have the same time. Hit save. Let's refresh this, take a look at it so far. And right now it's going to look a little weird. There's a bunch of styles that we're going to add to this, so we're still on the right track. Next, I want to create a little blurb, kind of an abstract, to give in kind of a preview of the information that would be sort of linked. I'm picturing this like a blog where someone could go and click on one of these articles and go find more information. So we're actually going to just go to Wikipedia and type in each animal. And I'm just going to copy the first paragraph of each, or the first couple sentences. It doesn't actually have to be too long. So I might just do the first two sentences. Alright, so what we're going to do is right after the time, we're going to create a paragraph. And in between here, we're going to paste it. Now you want to be careful with the types of characters you have. So far, these should show up fine. Let's see, what's our next animal? Alpaca. And my last entry is on the panda. And I might actually encounter some issues with these characters that are in another language. We'll have to see how these show up. Actually, looks like it showed up pretty well. it might depend on your computer. You might see if it's showing up well on yours. I've had it before, depending on the computer, show up as kind of alternative looking characters. Alright, so once you have that, let's go up to our styles. Our figure we can leave. Our figure caption should also be fine. So just underneath this, I'm going to scrunch this up a little bit. We'll see about the images. Let's just go add after image, do article, and we'll say float left, padding 50 pixels. After article, we'll do the aside. We'll say float right. Background, color green. Color white. Padding 10 pixels. Width 200 pixels, font size 1.2 em, margin right 100 pixels. We'll add an H1. Here we'll do text align center. So let's go ahead and hit save, refresh. And another thing we could actually do is add a border. Just say solid. Just so we have a bit of an idea of what our articles look like. We could maybe add a bottom margin. Just kind of space things out a little bit. Maybe do a top one as well. Well, I mostly just want that aside to have a little bit more room. Here we have a bit of information. It's not part of the main page, the main information. It's this kind of little side bit, which is kind of adding in information. You might use this aside as a way to have information maybe about a sale that's happening, or just some kind of extra tidbit. Maybe you want to use the aside to have social media or something in it, but it's going to be something that's going to not be part of kind of the main content. So everything essentially on this page is going to be in this section. Each of these are going to be individual articles. If we wanted to, this would be our opportunity to actually go in and add maybe after each paragraph, we actually want to have a link that would go to a page called, like, let's say cat.html, and then we could say click, let's say read more. So if I hit save, refresh, so here we'd have a link where someone could click and they could read more about this. You could play around with the order this goes in. Maybe we actually want to have the text below the figure, so it sort of wraps around a little bit. We could add style to our H2 as well. So the title will be centered. So it's kind of up to you, but this would be a way that you could organize multiple bits of information on a page. This tries to make it look a little bit more like a blog entry, but you could use this as well when you are thinking about how to organize your final project and thinking about those columns. Maybe rather than creating a div container, maybe you create sections or articles instead and have one section that contains essentially the information about, let's say, the cat, and then a second one that is going to contain the information about the alpaca. You could split up the areas on your page into multiple containers. It's going to be up to you how you organize your information, but it's a good idea to plan all of your information out beforehand and then use semantic HTML when you can and in a logical way. Now, when you are working with semantic HTML that is created optimally for HTML5, you want to allow backwards compatibility with older browsers. So a style that we want to add to our style section is going to list kind of the common semantic HTML5 elements. And then, unless otherwise specified, tell the browser that they need to be block displayed. So if the browser is older and it doesn't know what a header or, let's say, nav is, it will at least know that by default it should be displayed as a block. Then, if later on the page, if you said, for example, if we had a style for our article and we wanted to say that the display should be inline, we could overwrite that option. But it's a good idea to just go ahead and add that to the top of your pages, just in case someone is using an older version of a browser. So the next topic we're going to take a look at is how to configure web pages for printing with CSS. And we're going to look at using different media attributes. There are 3 different types: screen, print, and handheld. And so far what we have been working with has been for screen. We haven't been specifying the media. We've just been allowing the text editor to use screen by default. So let's go up to our head section. And we'll create some links. We'll say style sheet. And then let's say this will be called styles.css. What we're going to want to do is specify media is going to be equal to screen. So if the device that is being used is a screen, then the website will link to this style sheet for the styles. Alternatively, you can do style sheet and then let's link to a page that's called print. Say media equals print. And so what would happen here is we could change some of these styles depending on what would print best. So if we kind of take a look at this page, for example, this screen here, this would potentially waste somebody's ink. Maybe this person might want to print in black and white. And so it might actually be better for us to, instead of having a solid color change this so that way it was maybe just a border, and then this text could be black, and then we could just have white. So they would have the idea of the box container, but without having to use color and without having to worry about this background color kind of bleeding into this white area. It's actually pretty hard to print a colored background with white text on it and not have the color bleed. So that would be something we could do. We could also remove the images, so that way if somebody was printing this, they wouldn't have to worry about the images taking up space. A good example for this is to kind of look at different websites. I like to pick on recipe websites and blogs in general. Alright, so here is a website. This is the Pioneer Woman, and a recipe for triple chocolate cookies. And if we look at this page, we'll see that there is a lot of information. There's the social media icons, there's this information over here. One thing I've noticed a lot with blogs like this that have a lot of information is there's a lot of pictures that are really large, so you can see what to do. And then if you're trying to follow the recipe, there's a lot of extra information that you don't necessarily need while you're actually following the recipe. Like here we have, wait, it's Monday, let's just take a moment to enjoy this beautiful sight. We don't really need that. This is helpful. Beat it together. We don't necessarily need this language. It's totes combined, cracking the egg. So some of this is helpful, some of it isn't. I feel like a lot of times there's always some story letting us know what event it's being made for, and here we had boys at our house after church yesterday, and I don't know why I forget just how much food boys consume and so on. So if we go to print, we can take a look at what this website looks like. And usually websites like this that do have recipes do give you alternative PDF versions that you can click and download instead. But I've definitely found sites before that were just blogs, and this was the only option that they provided. So here we have a bunch of text that is overlapping each other. We can't read it. We have a bunch of pictures from other parts of the website, perhaps linking to other recipes. Here we have our big picture, which is taking up a lot of space. We have some information. This looks like the text is actually half on this page, half on the next page. And then, of course, we have pages and pages of comments. So we get to have other people's comments, we get to have links. Actually, it looks like we don't have all of those steps that we were expecting. This is all we have to actually show what the recipe is supposed to be. And like I said, usually there will be some link to another file, but rather than having to actually have a whole nother file, you can create your own style sheet that will instead go and look through the information and optimize it so that way you don't necessarily have to have multiple pages for people to work with. In this case, it might make sense based off of this person's marketing to have this type of narrative description and all the pictures, and then to have the alternative version to download. I've also seen this before with websites that you might be shopping, like an e-commerce site, where we might want to look at a product and find out more information. Maybe we want to print this out. And we'll see that it is kind of changing the styles based off of being printed, but there's a lot of information that's still here that we don't necessarily need on a printed out page. For example, we don't really need to have the sale information that's going on. It's helpful to have this overview. We don't really need these links to customers who also bought. I would expect that the person who might be printing this out might want to just have a picture, description. They might want to have a price. So if they're taking this and trying to compare it somewhere else, they might have that option, or if they're trying to look for an address or something. But again, this is not really the most optimized. And again, we have a ton of filler, reviews, comments. So if you are considering your page, you might think about what sort of information actually needs to be seen. Actually, let's go to the Wikipedia page. Let's see how Wikipedia handles printing. So Wikipedia actually does a really nice job of trying to organize the information and optimize it for printing. So they're expecting that the typical user who is printing the information no longer needs all of these kind of index options or table contents kind of information. So they are just giving you the actual information. We don't have any of the color on the links because we're not actually linking anywhere. You want to be careful of your page breaks and how information is going to end up stopping. So if there is a particular type of information that you need to make sure stops at a certain point, you would want to indicate that it shouldn't continue onto the next page. Here they've made sure that the contents doesn't get broken up. So it goes on to the next page where it's kind of partnered with this information. They're working with different columns to kind of split up information. It does get a little bit messy, like here this continues on. We have our images, but kind of throughout they have sort of this 2-column look, and then it kind of spills over when it can. This looks a little messy, but overall it's not too bad of an experience, and it actually parallels pretty well the content on the screen site. Let's see, we still have our references, which in this case I think makes sense for the content in case somebody was wanting to look up these resources again. And then they have simplified the bottom information and kind of removed the information that wasn't essential. So you want to consider what you may or may not need when you are working with your print styles. Alright, so let's go back to Sublime. I'm going to save this, close out of it. We're going to create a new file. And we'll choose save. This can go on the desktop. And we will call this mobile.html. Fill this out like normal. We'll call the title Mobile Design. We'll leave room for styles. Create an H1 heading. We'll say Mobile Design Best Practices. So this will allow us to kind of code and write our notes at the same time for mobile design best practices. Alright, so we're going to look at best practices for working with mobile design, and we're going to type it into our text editor as we go through. So we're going to create a couple of lists. Let's do an H2 underneath our H1. We'll call this methods of design. This will be looking at the domain. Now, when you're thinking of your domain, what people typically did in the past was have two different websites, one for their desktop, one for their mobile. Say design and publish a second website. And there were a couple of ways that you could do this. One is with a .mobtld. Another is creating a separate website within your own domain. Do design and publish a separate within your own domain optimized for mobile. So here's an example, the whitehouse.gov website and the mobile whitehouse.gov website, which now I think they actually are just the same website. The method we're going to be using in this class and looking at is having separate styles for desktop and mobile displays, but having the same website. So let's hit save, refresh, create another H2. This we'll call web design considerations. So these are things that you want to keep in mind when you are designing. You want to think about the small screen size. There's a lot less space, and so you want to make sure that you optimize the space that you are working with. You want to consider low bandwidth and how long it might take for someone to actually download the content on your website. So you want to make sure that you don't have a bunch of media graphics on there, like websites, like videos that instantly start playing, or really large images. You want to think about your font, color, and other media issues. Awkward controls and limited processor and memory. So thinking about how the typical user is going to be using your site, functionality. One example would be when you are working with links on a desktop. It's normal to have a hover link, but you can't actually use hover links on a touch screen. So that's something that you would want to remove and find perhaps a different way. You might also want to make your links larger so they're easier to click on, and have your items spaced out more so that way people don't have a hard time trying to aim while they are trying to click on your links. Let's create another H2 layout. So a single column layout is best. This is going to help you use the amount of space that you have most optimally. I'm going to have a small header, nav links, content, and page footer. Again, trying to find ways to limit how much space you are using on the screen. Consider that screens vary a lot. This is happening more and more too, especially as we have older devices that people are still using. Another way this is you'll see this happening a lot is newer phones have higher resolutions. They have more pixels per inch, and so you can actually see a lot more detail and have a lot more pixels in a designated area versus older phones still have fewer pixels per inch. So you can't assume that all phones will have a similar type of resolution. Some phones actually have closer resolutions to laptops. Limit scrolling to one direction. It's going to be really hard for someone to use wayfinding while they are on a phone, and so having to scroll in multiple directions can really cause somebody to get lost and disoriented. Use heading elements. It's just going to make it easier for people to find information quickly. Same with this next. Use lists to organize information. Avoid using tables or other types of information that might not be very easy to see on a smaller screen, where it's important for people to understand the relationships of the information. Think about alternative ways that you could present that information to the reader. Provide labels for form controls. That's just kind of good advice in general. Avoid using pixel units. This is definitely going to be helpful thinking back to the idea of resolution, where phones just have such a large variety of resolutions that you really can't take for granted what pixel size is going to look best. Avoid absolute positioning, since we don't know what the best position is going to be on each device and which devices are going to be used. Hide content that is not essential for mobile use. It's kind of similar to print, where you wouldn't necessarily want to have a bunch of images or ads that are taking up space. I've seen a lot of websites that just have ads that float over top of the content and block you from being able to read any of it. Let's make another H2. This one will be optimal navigation. So looking at what you can do to optimize your navigation. Provide minimal navigation near, minimal nav near the top. Provide consistent navigation. So using the same kind of terms, letting people have as unified of a look as possible so they don't get lost. Avoid hyperlinks that open files in new windows, so people know how they got from one place to another. Try to balance both the number of hyperlinks on a page and then a good idea is to use the hamburger menu. And that's those three lines that you'll often see in the corner that allow for a menu to slide onto the screen or kind of pop up and disappear when it's not needed. So we'll do another H2. This time we'll look at optimize graphics for mobile use. Avoid images greater than 320 pixels. This is kind of the resolution of an older phone, so you wouldn't want to go much larger than that, because people who are using older phones are going to have to scroll in order to see the picture. Configure alternative small background images. So if possible, using maybe background colors instead if you still want to have some color, but allow the page to load faster. Avoid the use of large graphic images. Specify the size of images, so that way the device can start loading that space even if the image isn't there yet. Provide alt text for graphics and other non-text elements, so that way someone could choose whether or not they want to turn that information off. Okay, let's do another H2. This will be optimize text for mobile use. Provide good contrast between text and background colors. That's also good advice in general. Use common font type faces. In case someone has a limited amount of fonts they can use, configure font size with M units or percentages. So that will help when you're working with a large variety of different size screens. Use a short descriptive page title. And then our last H2 is just going to be nice and short. Design for one web. So designing everything to be on one website. So I'm going to save this, refresh. So you have those notes. Next we're going to look at the viewport meta tag. Which here we have a meta tag up here where we've specified the character set. So we can also make a meta tag that will specify the viewport. So what is the viewport? The viewport is the user's visible area of a web page. The viewport varies with the device and will be smaller on a mobile phone than on a computer screen. Before tablets and mobile phones, web pages were designed only for computer screens. It was common for web pages to have a static design and a fixed size. This all changed when we moved towards working with tablets and mobile phones. And in those cases, web pages were too large to fit the new viewport. To fix this, browsers on these devices scaled down the entire web page to fit the screen. So we're going to take a look at how in HTML5 we can work with the viewport. So we're going to take a look at how HTML5 introduced a method to let web designers take control over the viewport through the meta tag. We're going to type in meta name equals viewport content, and we're going to set this so the width is going to be based off of the device's width, and then we're going to set it so that it has an initial scale of 1. The initial scale sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded by the browser. Some things to take into consideration: users don't want to have to scroll a page horizontally as well as vertically, so you need to be careful with setting the viewport. And it's a good idea to add a viewport to each of your pages no matter what. Do not use large fixed width elements. For example, if an image is displayed at a width wider than the viewport, it can cause the viewport to scroll horizontally. Remember to adjust this content to fit within the width of the viewport. So like we looked at on here, we want to avoid images that are greater than 320 pixels. Anything that we would want to show on a larger screen, like a desktop, we would want to apply a different style so they wouldn't overlap. Do not let the content rely on a particular viewport width to render well. Since screen dimensions and width in CSS pixels vary widely between devices, content should not rely on a particular viewport width to render well. Use CSS media queries to apply different styling for small and large screens. And that's what we're going to look at next. So we have our viewport and we have some options. We can set the width, height, initial scale, minimum scale, maximum scale, user scalable. This is going to be a good kind of basic setting to have. We're going to assume that we have a style sheet to link to. We're going to take a look at media queries and how you would use them with a style sheet. Media queries use Boolean statements, which are true-false statements that evaluate screen devices. And they look at the different types, whether it's all devices, screen devices, only certain devices that meet certain statements. Or print. You can have certain properties like max width, max height, min height, orientation, minimum device width, etc. So we'll create a link to a style sheet. We'll call this styles.css. And then after this, we're going to add media. We're going to say only screen and min width 768 pixels and max width 1024 pixels. So here, this style sheet will be called up, but it will only be applied to devices that are a screen. So if you were printing, it wouldn't apply to print styles. And the device would have to be between the dimensions of 768 and 1024. So what you could do here is you could create multiple style sheets. Let's just copy this real quick. And instead, maybe I can call this one mobile. And instead, I would say only screen and maximum width, say 767 pixels. So it's only going to apply to styles that are smaller than this size. So you'd want to think about the hierarchy of how you're actually going to call up these style sheets. So depending on which styles you have in each one, you might have fewer styles in this mobile one, just a couple styles, and then everything else is in a previous style sheet. Now, by doing this, you have to have several different style sheets. You can also use media queries and create media rules all in the same style sheet. So how you would do that is by using the @media. And then here we would say the same kind of thing, only screen and max width 480 pixels. And then you use your curly brackets and group together all of your styles. So you could have an H1 style in here. Actually, let's just put these all in the same line. You might have paragraph style in here. You want to pay attention to your brackets. These are often kind of overlooked. It might be easy to forget your end one, but all of your styles for this need to all be contained within these larger brackets. Then you could have another style. And it's going to be up to you. You can either go in order of desktop, tablet, mobile, or you can go mobile, tablet, desktop. I believe your assignments are going to go desktop, tablet, mobile. So you could use that if you're more comfortable with it. Alright, so your final project is going to require you to have 3 different media queries as well as having 2 different style sheets. One of them is going to need to be styled for print, one for screens. Your screen one should have desktop, tablet, and mobile. So you want to make sure that you know how to use media queries and are comfortable with it. So this is going to be everything we're going to take a look at in this video. Next time we are going to take a look at working with tables in HTML and CSS.